I thought I filmed the first part of me doing the first layer of fiberglass for the mother mold, but I guess the battery died on the camera and it cut out really within the first 2 minutes of me doing it. So what I'm showing you right now is basically this kind of yellowish part here I did a couple days ago and let it set up, and what I'm going to do now is do the second coat. So I'll be able to at least show you how I do the second coat, which is really the way I did the first coat. Basically I'm using 2-part epoxy resin, and you mix this stuff, 2 parts the epoxy resin, 1 part the epoxy hardener. Now the difference between this stuff and like polyurethane, I think it's called polyurethane resin, is the polyurethane resin is definitely a lot cheaper. It's probably maybe half the cost, but the fumes that polyresin, I think it's polyresin, the cheaper kind of resin, is that it puts out crazy fumes, like very intense fumes, and the fumes are so strong that your whole house, if you do this like in a garage, will smell. This stuff puts out a little bit of a fume, but really not too bad. Really not too bad at all. So basically what I'm doing is I'm doing 2 ounces of the epoxy, 1 ounce of the, or 2 ounces of the resin, 1 ounce of the hardener. Because it's called hardener doesn't mean the more hardening you put in, the faster it'll set or the harder it'll set. If it's too little hardener or too much hardener, the epoxy just will not fully cure and it will stay tacky. And no matter what you do, if you leave it for a week, it will probably still be tacky, and it won't be fully cured and will be weak. So you definitely want to make sure you do the right amount. Now, the thing is that the more you mix, the more lenient it is. So I've built like fly fishing rods, and doing the wraps on that, I use like a really expensive epoxy, or epoxy resin that goes on super clear. But the thing is that I only use small little cups worth because it sets really quickly. With that, you have to be very exact, because if you don't mix it properly or you don't mix the right amount, then it won't set. So it can be kind of stressful. But with this, doing 3 ounces total will get me about halfway, and then I'll mix a second batch. I don't want to mix a huge amount, because if this sets off really quickly, then it's wasting the resin. Now another thing is I'm stirring this pretty aggressively, and there's lots of air bubbles in there. I don't care, because this is just a mother mold. I don't care about air bubbles. If you are doing resin work for like a clear coat on something, you definitely need to stir very slowly and try not to get any bubbles. So there is a way of mixing it, which is just be slow, but I don't really care about air bubbles. I just want to make sure this stuff's really well mixed. So the good thing to do is buy like packages of these cheap brushes, where they come out to like 70 cents a brush or something like that. You can get them at dollar stores too. So just like, I think it's like camel hair or something like that, really cheap. Pull the bristles out. It doesn't really matter if any bristles get on there. So then what I did was, with the first coat on there, after it's set for a few hours, it had gone it was sticky. So while it was sticky, I cut and laid more fabric where I was going to want it. This is woven fiberglass, so it will be strong in both directions no matter what, but I'm just trying to make sure I get good coverage. I'm hoping that just 2 layers will be strong enough, but we'll see. I think it will. And the way, you got to make sure that the stuff really soaks into the fabric. It is basically just fabric, so it will soak the resin up. And the other thing about fiberglassing is, when it comes to applying the actual resin, more isn't necessarily better. So you may think like, oh yeah, if I put more resin in, it'll be stronger, and it'll last better or whatnot, but that's not necessarily true. So you want to make sure it just soaks into the fabric, but it doesn't need to be like super wet. I find that kind of doing like what you see here is just kind of like jabbing it or poking it really helps the resin soak in. If you try to like just brush it on, the fabric will really move really easily. Where if you just kind of try to apply it like this, you force the resin into the fabric, but you don't move the fabric. So I'll let this set. I'll probably let it set for a couple days. I just want it to really cure. Maybe tomorrow, what I'll do is I'll pull all the tin foil off, the cardboard tin foil on the back. Let it really set up for another day after pulling that off, and then coat it all with Vaseline, and do the other side. The tin foil pulled off the resin, the epoxy resin, very easily. Everything came apart pretty easily, actually. The tape is still stuck underneath there, so I just trimmed it. And yeah, everything looks great. It's nice and solid, like very solid. No, almost no flex to it. It's all set up really nicely. And yeah, so basically now what I'm going to do is do the same thing, which I've already done, which you've already seen, to the other side. Alright, so I'm not going to make you watch me go through all of this again on this side. I got both sides done, as you can see here. Let this set up overnight, and time to try to get this thing split apart. I really hope it comes apart. And I got some tools, like painting tools. They're nice and thin that I can hopefully get in there and start prying it apart. I've also already drilled all the holes around for putting bolts through, and that's just did that now so that I know it's all centered perfectly. So fingers crossed, see if I can get this apart. So the next step is going to be getting the silicone off of the actual mask. And sometimes, I guess with like different masks, you can just peel it right off. But this, there's just no way that I'll be able to peel this thing off the mask with this small hole. So what I have to do is cut up the back here. And I don't know why, but I've read that it's better to do zigzag cuts than a straight cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my scissors and start cutting. Well, I'm going to use scissors and a knife, but I want to try using the scissors first, and we'll see how this goes. So here we go. First cut's nice, but to do a nice zigzag, I think I'm going to have to use the knife, which I'm going to. So, nice fresh blade, and I'm just going to do bit by bit. Oh, and that noise in the background, if you hear that, that is my son. My wife is taking the dog for a walk, so he is in the garage with me, heckling me in the background. And the silicone just tore. Which is okay, but as you can see how thick it is there, and thick there, and really thin here, and the really thin point right there, and it tore. So this is when it would be good having, so instead of, this probably only had 2 layers instead of 3 layers right there. So that's definitely a weak spot. So instead of it tearing more, what I'll do is I'll just keep doing a relief cut higher up. I was going to see if I could peel it off, but there's no point in damaging this more. It should be okay. It just means that when I put this in the mother mold, there's just going to be one more seam. When I put this in there, there's going to be one spot where there's going to be a seam as well. And I'll just have to make sure that that's nice and laid flat. So that's okay. Could be worse. It could be worse. Sometimes, times like that, you just gotta think it could be worse. Okay. Whoo! And she came out. Oh man. It tore right there. At least it's like a nice clean tear. It didn't like tear a chunk off. It just kind of went this way. I should have just cut this further up, but I was being ambitious, I guess. But there we go. So that's when I was doing the silicone, it would be nice to have two different colors with the silicone, because if you have two different colors, then you can see where you're overlapping. And I know I put like a lot of silicone on the eyes and everything, so that's all super thick. But and another thing was that after I did this, I watched a video of somebody doing silicone, and what they did was where they were going to do the cut, they added like extra silicone, so it was really strong, so it was like this thick instead of, you know, that thick. You can kind of see the thickness difference. So the whole way up where the cut line is, if it had been this thick, it wouldn't have torn like that. Well, maybe it would have, but it wouldn't have torn that far. And looking underneath, it's pretty thin all the way up to here, so that really, I'm lucky that it stopped there. And it's also right where the keys are, so the keys should be able to hold it in place.